Walt Pruner had strung the same 40 feet of scents along the gallery rail of probate Courtroom 2 for 20 Decembers running, and in 20 Decembers he had learned to let the hearings wash over him like weather. Motions, murmurs, the bailiff clearing his throat for the 100th time. None of it usually broke through. He did this every year the week before Christmas. Mostly so, the gallery wouldn't look so much like a waiting room, while families sat through the worst part of losing somebody. Nobody ever thanked him for it, and nobody ever complained either, and that suited Walt fine. But the voice that cut across the room that Tuesday morning had an edge to it that stopped him cold. One loop of bulb still hanging over his forearm. "Your Honor, this woman has no standing here whatsoever." The attorney didn't turn around as he said it, addressing the bench with his back half to the gallery, where an elderly woman sat alone in the front row, coat buttoned to the throat, a small cloth bag resting on her knees. She is not family. She is not named in the will, the trust, or any codicil. At best, she is a neighbor who let herself into a dying man's house whenever she pleased, and on her way out, it appears, she helped herself to his property. The woman didn't move. Walt had clocked her when she came in an hour earlier, quiet, composed, the kind of person who held a door for everyone behind her, without seeming to think about it. She watched the attorney now with the patient, unhurried attention of someone who had spent a long career waiting for a room to settle down on its own. "Mrs. Voss." The attorney finally turned to her. "You've told this court that the item currently in your bag was a gift from Mr. Castell, but you weren't named in any document. You have no formal relationship to this estate at all. So I have to ask, what is it, exactly, that you think gives you a claim here? Proximity?" "I knew Edwin for 31 years, Eleanor Voss said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. The voice of someone used to being heard at the back of a classroom without raising it. "He lived 2 doors down from me the whole time. I think 3 decades of friendship counts for something." "It counts for nothing under the law. Ma'am, with respect." He said it lightly, the way a man flicks a crumb off a tablecloth. "What this court has in front of it is an unlisted item, removed from a decedent's estate 4 months ago, undisclosed until you walked in here this morning. I'd ask the court to strike Mrs. Voss's testimony as irrelevant, order the item returned to the estate inventory immediately, and proceed with distribution as filed, today, if the court is willing. The family would like this concluded before the holiday." Judge Halloway, gray-haired and broad-shouldered, had presided over probate Courtroom 2 for 11 years, and had the look of a man who had heard a great many people try to conclude things before a holiday. He studied the attorney for a moment without expression, then turned to Eleanor. "Mrs. Voss, counsel says this item was undisclosed until this morning. Is that accurate?" "I brought it with me today, Your Honor, because I heard the household contents were in dispute, and I didn't want anyone thinking I'd hidden something that wasn't mine to keep." Eleanor's hand stayed folded over the bag. "I've had it on my mantle since the December before Edwin's first stroke. If the court says it belongs to the estate, I'll hand it over today, gladly. I only came to explain where it came from. And what is the item?" Eleanor reached into the cloth bag and lifted out a small wooden figure. A shepherd, no taller than her palm, the wood worn pale and smooth at the edges in the particular way of things that have been held, often, by the same hands. It's part of a nativity set. Edwin carved the whole thing himself, over years in his workshop behind the house. He gave me the shepherd that December. He told me it was finished, and that it was mine to keep. "And there's no record of that," the attorney said. "No note, no witness, nothing but your word, 4 months after the fact, regarding an item that, I'll point out, doesn't appear anywhere on the estate appraiser's inventory. Which raises the question of where exactly it's been, and why it's surfacing now." "On my mantle," Eleanor said. "Where he put it, and it's surfacing now, because I just told you why. So you say." Judge Halloway raised a hand before the attorney could continue. "Counsel, before we get into inventories and distributions, if there's a physical item at the center of a dispute, this court is going to look at it first, not argue about it in the abstract. Mrs. Voss, would you hand the figure to the bailiff, please?" Eleanor hesitated. Not, Walt thought, from reluctance, but the particular hesitation of handing over something you've kept close for months. Then she passed it forward. Bailiff Reyes carried the little shepherd to the bench, the way a man carries something that might still be warm. Behind him, the next 2 cases on the morning docket shifted in their seats, and somewhere down the hall a clock, Walt had never once seen anyone wind struck the Half hour. Judge Halloway turned the figure over once under his desk lamp. Unremarkable, a simple carving. The kind of thing a person might walk past in a shop without a second look, and then more slowly, turned it over again. "Counsel," he said, not looking up. "Did the estate's appraiser examine the underside of this piece?" The attorney blinked. "Your Honor, the appraiser's report notes the item wasn't located for inspection at the time of the walkthrough. It isn't cataloged. I'm aware it isn't cataloged. I'm asking whether anyone, at any point, looked at the bottom of it." Judge Halloway held the figure out, base toward the courtroom. And for the first time all morning, the attorney came forward to actually look at the thing he'd spent 10 minutes calling worthless, carved into the base in small, careful letters. The kind of lettering that takes a steady hand and a great many quiet evenings, was a separate line of text. Judge Halloway read it slowly, and the courtroom went still around him in a way Walt had felt only a handful of times in 20 years. "For Eleanor, so she always has a piece of the workshop, with my thanks." He paused. "There's a date carved beneath it. December, 3 years before Mr. Castell's death." Nobody spoke. Up on his ladder, Walt realized he'd stopped working entirely. The loop of lights still draped over his arm, forgotten. Even the 2 waiting cases had gone quiet. "There's something else here." The judge ran a thumb along a narrow groove on the underside of the base. A seam Walt himself would never have noticed, even holding the thing in his own hands, and drew out a small square of paper, folded tight, brittle with age, that had been tucked into the wood itself. He unfolded it carefully, read it once to himself, and then aloud. "If anyone ever asks whether I meant for her to have this, yes, every piece in this set has a name carved into it somewhere, for whoever I want to have it when I'm gone. This one says Eleanor. It always has, since the day I made it." He set the note down on the velvet pad in front of him. "It's signed, same date as the carving." The attorney opened his mouth, and then, visibly, found nothing to put in it. At the respondent's table, a man in his 50s, Garrett Castell, Edwin's son, who had sat through the entire hearing with his jaw set and his eyes fixed on the table in front of him, looked up at the little wooden figure for the first time since the hearing began. Judge Halloway set the shepherd down gently, and for a moment he simply looked at the file in front of him before he spoke again. "Counsel, your motion stated, and I'm reading directly, that this item has no provenance, no markings, and no documentation supporting Mrs. Voss's claim." He lifted a sheet of paper. "The estate's own appraiser photographed this exact item 4 months ago, before it ever left the house. Time-stamped. Included in the file your office submitted to this court. The underside is visible in 2 of those photographs. The inscription is visible in both. Your Honor, I hadn't personally reviewed those particular images. My associate handled the appraisal file. Then your motion represented something to this court that no one in your office had verified." Judge Halloway said, "About an item whose provenance was sitting in your own case file the entire time." He let the room sit with that for a moment. "This court finds that the carving and the accompanying note together constitute a completed gift from Edwin Castell to Eleanor Voss, made during his lifetime, with clear and documented donative intent, well prior to any dispute regarding this estate. The item was never part of the estate. It's removed from the inventory, effective immediately, and returned to Mrs. Voss." He turned a page. As to the motion to strike Mrs. Voss's testimony, denied. As to the broader challenge to her standing in these proceedings, also denied. "I find her account credible, and as of this morning, corroborated by the estate's own records, which she had no part in producing. I'm entering a finding that counsel's representations regarding this item were made without adequate factual basis, and I'm referring the matter to the bar's professional responsibility office for review." He set down his pen. "We'll take a 10-minute recess. When we resume, we'll proceed to the remaining inventory items, and I'd ask counsel to confirm, this time, that everything on that list has actually been looked at, front and back, before anyone else stands up in my courtroom and calls something worthless." The gavel came down lighter than Walt expected, almost gentle, and for a moment nobody in the gallery moved. Then the room exhaled all at once, the way a held breath finally lets go. Eleanor Voss reached out and took the shepherd back from Bailiff Reyes with both hands, the way someone takes back a sleeping child, and held it against her coat. She didn't look at the attorney at all. She didn't need to. Across the aisle, Garrett Castell stood. For a moment, Walt thought he was simply leaving, but instead he crossed toward Eleanor, stopping a respectful distance away, The way a person approaches someone at a funeral they aren't sure will want to talk to them. I didn't know about the note, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but the gallery had gone quiet enough that Walt heard every word of it. I didn't know he kept things like that, carved like that, names and all. He carved something for everyone he loved, Garrett, Eleanor said. He just didn't always get around to handing them over while he could. That was Edwin. He'd rather finish a thing than say a thing. Garrett looked at the little shepherd a moment longer, his hands loose at his sides. Was there one for me? In the set? There's a whole nativity, Garrett. 12 pieces, near as I can count, going back years. I expect you'll find out which ones have names on them, when you're ready to look properly. She said it without warmth and without coldness, the way a teacher hands back an exam, certain the student already knows the grade matters more than she does. Garrett nodded once and didn't say anything else. But he didn't walk away, either. He sat down in the row behind her, and when the bailiff called the recess, he was still there, turning his father's note over in his hands as if he were reading it again from the start. Up on his ladder, Walt finally finished looping the last string of lights along the gallery rail. He'd never paid much attention to what happened in the room below him, not really. He'd always figured it was just people, arguing over things, the way people in courtrooms did. He found the outlet behind the jury box and plugged the cord in, and the lights came on, small and warm, the kind of thing nobody notices until the day they're not there. Eleanor Voss passed beneath them a few minutes later, on her way out for the recess, the little wooden shepherd held against her chest with both hands. For just a second, the lights caught the worn places on its surface, the places where one set of hands, and then another, would hold it close enough, often enough, to keep it that way for another 30 years. Walt climbed down from his ladder and didn't say anything to anyone, but for the first time in 20 Decembers, he stood at the back of the gallery, a minute after the room had mostly cleared, looking at the empty seat where she'd been sitting, the recess clock ticking somewhere down the hall. Not everything that came through that courtroom was a fight over things, he thought. Some of it, once in a while. If you look closely enough, and someone finally turned it over, was just something finding its way, a little late, to where it had always been meant to go.